Conversation with the Candidate continues.
Thank you for clicking on our extended digital conversation with the candidate, Senator Kamala Harris of California. We're going to jump right back into the town hall questions. So we're going to start with Benjamin Pelletier.
Hello, Senator Harris. Hi. I am saddened by our dying American dream, the one that was prevalent in my grandparents' generation and some of my parents' generation.
Yeah.
It seems as though the rich can only achieve this dream now.
Yeah.
They do not have to worry about paying taxes, paying high college tuition, and losing their prescriptions because they cost more. Some people were never able to achieve this dream because they have been held back by racism and sexism. What will you and Congress do to get the American people, especially African Americans, Latinos, and other minorities, the chance to prosper in our country?
That's a great question, and thank you. So you're right. I mean, there is no question that over many years the rules have been written in a way that have not supported working families, middle-class families, as evidenced by what we talked about earlier. Almost half of American families can't afford a $400 unexpected expense. In America today, in 99% of the counties in our country, if you're a minimum wage worker working full-time, you can't afford a one-bedroom apartment. In America last year, 12 million people took out a loan of, on average, $400 from the payday lender at an interest rate often in excess of 300%. America's economy is not working for working people. You are absolutely right. And then you add on top of that things like student loan debt. I'll tell you, when I was Attorney General of California and I ran the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice, I took on the predators, including the predatory for-profit colleges. I put one out of business and got a $1 billion verdict because they were preying on hardworking families that were just trying to get an education and telling these students, a lot of them young adults, that they would get jobs and they would go on to become prosperous and productive, and they were just duping them. You look at predatory practices. I've taken on, for example, pharmaceutical companies that preyed on seniors. I had a huge battle with the 5 big banks in the United States who were preying on homeowners, selling them these mortgages that they could not afford and then doing these foreclosures without checking to see if the family could really afford to stay in their home. So you're right about how the system has been designed. There are many things that are beautiful about our system, and there are many things that are broken about our system, especially as it relates to working people. To your point, this president passed a tax bill that benefited the top 1% and the biggest corporations in America. Came and said he was going to help working people. But right now you can look at everyone from farmers to auto workers who are looking at financial peril by the end of this year alone. Because of this president's so-called trade policy, I call it trade policy by tweet, the American consumer is right now paying $1.4 billion more a month in everything from shampoo to washing machines. 60 of the biggest corporations in the United States paid no taxes last year. Who among us paid no taxes last year? So you are spot on right. The rules have been written in a way, and then we have seen conduct by this administration, which makes clear it is not an agenda that's about working people. How do we deal with disparities? You talk about gender, you talk about race. Well, one of the things I'm prepared to do is deal with equal pay. Let me tell you why. I'm not going to ask you the year you were born, but I know you were not born around 1963. But do you know what happened in 1963? In 1963, your government, our country, passed what was called the Equal Pay Act. Because way back in 1963, in the olden days, we agreed women are not paid the same amount as men for equal work. And we got to deal with that. We need to put some laws in place because it's just not right. Fast forward to the year of our Lord 2019. Women are paid on average 80 cents on the dollar. Black women are paid 61 cents. Native American women 58 cents. And Latinas 53 cents on the dollar. So I'm kind of done with the subject because it's not a debatable point anymore. Women are not paid equally for equal work. It's not a debatable point. So here's what I'm prepared to do. I'm prepared to put in place a requirement that instead of making that working woman prove that she's not being paid the same amount as the gentleman who's working in the cubicle next to her, because she's working and she's got a family that she's helping to raise. Instead, I'm going to put the burden on the corporation to prove that they're paying men and women equally for equal work, and they're going to have to put that information about whether they're not on their website. And just to create encouragement and incentive, for every 1% differential there'll be between how much they're paying men and women, they will be fined an equal percent from their previous year's profits. That'll get their attention.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Benjamin. Next
That was
question
a great question, Benjamin.
comes from Terrence Guinarine.
Hi, Senator. Thank you
Hello.
for being here.
Terrence, thank you.
In your campaign memoir released early this year, you wrote that you believe in dismantling the failed war on drugs, starting with legalizing marijuana. In New Hampshire, there is a severe drug issue,
Yeah.
and I would like to know how you would put together a successful plan war against drugs and why it includes legalizing marijuana, and why you don't believe this will lead individuals one step closer to addiction.
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you, Terrence. So, as you know, I'm a former prosecutor. I actually started my career as a prosecutor during the height of the crack epidemic. And what I witnessed firsthand through what I do believe was the failed war on drugs is that on an issue that was essentially about addiction and public health, we criminalized whole communities and populations of people. And we ended up turning the jails and prisons of the United States into mental health facilities and substance abuse facilities around this issue. Instead of doing the right thing, and we've seen it happen. I mean, New Hampshire has been an incredible leader on this. And I all praise to Senators Shaheen and Hassan and so many others who have said, hey, no, wait a minute. This issue of drug addiction, one, it's a disease. Two, therefore, it's a public health issue, and our response as government should be to treat it as a public health issue, which means not incarcerating people, but getting them treatment and help, getting their families help. In New Hampshire, for example, we have seen that in this state has the 4th highest rate of OD, of death, because of opioids. But I think since last year, that number of deaths has gone down because of the response by the leaders in this state, including the 2 senators that have said, no, we can deal with this, but let's deal with it with treatment, with mental health services. I also think about it in a way that is about saying, look, when we're talking about the effects of what is a massive addiction issue, there are all kinds of ramifications, including right here in New Hampshire, but around the country, what we call the grand families. Seniors, people who have worked their entire lives, worked hard, and are now raising their grandchildren because their children are suffering from this addiction and are incapacitated in terms of their ability to parent those children. So there are all kinds of ramifications, and we have to treat it as a public health issue, specifically on the issue of marijuana. We incarcerated whole entire populations, in particular of young men of color, for possessing, marijuana, and ended up being felons for life on an issue that was just literally, if you look at it in terms of the disparities, in terms of who was arrested, who was incarcerated, and who was using, it was just wrong. And, not all drugs are the same. On the issue of marijuana, I actually believe also that there are legitimate health benefits. I am a supporter of medical marijuana. I have personally known people who were sick and only benefited from its use, could only get an appetite when they were going through chemotherapy because of it. So I also believe we need to decriminalize it so we can study it and see the medicinal benefits of it. And for that reason, I take the position that I do. So I thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terrence. We've got a question coming from email. Christine Carter asks, I'm the parent of a high school senior who will be applying to college this year. I'm also a teacher and a single parent, so we will obviously need financial aid. What plan do you have to help with the rising cost of student debt, as our family will inevitably need to apply for a loan, especially since UNH is one of the most expensive state universities in the country?
Right, and again, with the highest in-state tuition of any state in the country. First, thank you for teaching. Thank you for being a teacher, one of the most noble professions that exists. And in fact, I have one way that we're going to address this specific concern is that I have a whole initiative that's about closing the teacher pay gap because currently in America I'm meeting more teachers who are working 2 and 3 jobs because that salary will not allow them to pay their bills. Teachers in American public schools, 94% come out of their own pocket to help pay for school supplies, and teachers on average are paid 11% less than similarly educated professionals. So my proposal will close the teacher pay gap with a federal investment, which will be state and federal matching funds, and it'll be approximately in New Hampshire, but also nationally, an average of $13,500 a year, which $13,500 a year is a year's worth of mortgage payments in most places, or a year's worth of groceries, or putting a significant dent in student loan debt. So that's one way I'll deal with that specific issue. Student loan debt, first of all, we got to deal, we're not talking enough about this, with how the tuition is being hiked up across the country. So that's one issue. But on the student loans, also let's track history, back to the earlier point, that over a period of time, we ended up allowing a lot of private companies to get into this space of issuing student loans and also servicing those student loans. And we've seen a lot of abuses and predatory practices. Again, maybe because of my former profession, I strongly believe, based on the work I've done, that we also need to go after the predators in this space who are taking advantage of families and taking advantage of those students. Also, student loan forgiveness, in particular for students that are going into public service. I also believe that we need to have debt-free college, so for families that are making less than $100,000 or $125,000 a year. And then we need to look at what we've got to do around allowing students to refinance their student loans. So there are a bunch of different areas where we need to focus, but all with the goal of bringing down this burden. Because the way it's playing out, and I'm meeting students across our country who, you know, a student who is studying science and would love nothing more than to go and be a teacher in a high school, but because of the debt they have with the student loans, they're going to go and work in a pharmaceutical company because they can't follow their passion. I'm meeting students who are coming out of school and wondering if they'll ever be able to start a family. It's very real, and we need to address it. And I'm going to connect this again because all of these issues are connected. Let's go back to that trade policy for a moment. So part of the issue there is about the fact that we need to deal with China, that is stealing American intellectual property, IP, right? They're dumping substandard products into our economy. But you know the other part of this issue that is not getting any attention and is equally important? We need to compete. We need to compete. Around the globe, we are seeing ascending economies. And it is challenging us to figure out where we will be in this new world. We're in the middle of an industrial and digital revolution. Where are we going to be? We need to compete. People are getting stronger. We need to get stronger. That means investing in our students. It means investing in the American workforce and building up our skills. And that, frankly, is what drives me bananas about this current administration. Starting fires everywhere. Issuing policy by tweet, going on a unilateral way like one person on their own, instead of doing the real hard work, but the real work of saying, hey, let's invest in the American people. Let's invest in our economy. Let's grow our economy. Let's compete. That's part of what's missing with this current administration, and that's why this guy who's currently in the White House really has to get out. We don't have time for this.
Next question comes from Sam Kluger.
Hi, Sam.
Senator Harris, my question is, what initiatives will you take to ensure my generation has an environmentally safe future?
Yeah, you're so right. And that really does capture the whole point. Those of us who are in a position of leadership have got to do right by you and your children. And so first of all, I don't even call it a climate change. I think it's a climate crisis. And the clock is ticking. And we have to treat this with a sense of urgency because it does represent an existential threat to who we are as a nation and a globe and a species. So I support a Green New Deal. I also, on day one, would re-enter the Paris Agreement and re-enter our nation and our country on that stage of leaders around the globe who are taking this seriously. Unfortunately, we have a current administration that is pushing science fiction instead of science fact. You know, it's a line from one of my colleagues, and I'm going to just take it from him for the moment, but it's his, which is, you know, this current president is talking about wind turbines cause cancer. They don't cause, this is his line now, not mine. They don't cause cancer, they cause jobs. We have to invest in renewable energies. We have to understand that we need to treat water as a precious resource. For generations, we've been fighting wars over oil. In a short matter of time, we will fight them over water. What are we doing to build up our infrastructure around investing in the capture of water, the storage of water, right? All of these things. We have got to be smart, and we have to act with a sense of urgency. And that's how I think about it. Because I want for you and your children and your grandchildren exactly what we all need, much less want, which is to be able to breathe clean air and drink clean water. And at its core, that's what's at stake. And so we need leadership. And again, this is one of the most urgent reasons probably why we need a new president of the United States.
Thank you, Sam. Next question comes from
Sam.
Joan Whitworth.
Senator,
Hi, John.
the ideas you have been presenting during your campaign seem to have a lot in common with those of other candidates such as Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Could you highlight some of the major differences between your proposals and theirs, and tell us what sets you apart in this very crowded field?
That's great. I mean, ultimately, I'm going to let you, Joan, do that. But I'll say this. And I'm not really speaking about them as much as just I want to share with you my perspective. And my perspective goes back to that 3 a.m. agenda. I'm not trying to upend markets. I'm not trying to, you know, overhaul entire systems. As my first priority, it's about literally dealing with the things that keep people up at night. And I come at that having had the experience of being an elected leader at local government, state government, federal government, where I've always had a responsibility to just get things done. For me, my work has not just been about, you know, fancy speeches and only good policy. It's been about actually implementation and getting things done. And so that's the way I approach these issues. When it comes to what we're going to need, because I think this is part of what your question is requiring, is an answer to what are we going to need on that stage in a general. We're going to need someone who knows how to prosecute the case against 4 more years of Donald Trump. I know how to do that. And as far as I'm concerned, there's a really good, hefty rap sheet upon which to do that prosecution. And it's going to include everything from that tax bill that benefited the top 1% and the biggest corporations. It's going to include almost everything that we've discussed today. It's going to include the fact that we've put babies in cages and separated children from their parents. It's going to include the fact that we've got everyone from farmers to auto workers who are going to lose their jobs or lose their financial health and stability because of this so-called trade policy. It's going to include the fact that instead of having a commander-in-chief who understands the responsibility that comes with that position to protect our nation's democracy and security, we currently have a so-called commander-in-chief who, on the subject of Russia's actual interference in the election of the President of the United States, embraces the word of the Russian president over the word of the American intelligence community. On the subject of an American student who was tortured and later died, a commander-in-chief currently, who embraces the word of a North Korean dictator over the word of the American intelligence community. On the subject of a journalist who was assassinated, a journalist who has American credentials, a current commander-in-chief who prefers to take the word of a Saudi prince over the word of the American intelligence community. We need a new commander-in-chief and someone who is prepared to do the work of concerning herself, as she always has, with your safety.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joan. Next question comes from Sean Lewis.
Thank you for taking my question,
Hi,
Senator.
Sean.
Among the many issues you've championed on the campaign trail, how important is campaign finance and lobbying reform?
Yeah.
Do you believe that it's the biggest barrier to systemic reform, and would you support a 28th Amendment to eliminate corporate money from our elections? There's no question that our system of financing campaigns is wrong. The influence of money in campaigns is disgusting.
And we can point to a number of specific points that have made it so, including Citizens United, that allowed corporations and anonymous rich people to influence the outcome of elections, where we have in many ways moved away from one person, one vote. I have made a vow to not take corporate PAC money and Federalist lobbyist money, and it would be one of my highest priorities to reform what we're doing in terms of campaign finance. It has to happen, because right now there are corporations and very rich people who have had an outsized influence on the way that we are making decisions. You look at the commercials, you look at I'm running for president. I'm going to tell you, it's really expensive. It's really expensive to talk to our nation about the issues with this level of detail. And it shouldn't be that only the rich people get to influence the conversation. So I feel strongly about it, as you can tell. And yes, the answer is yes.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Next question comes from Judith Pence.
Thank you for coming and answering our questions.
Thank you, Judith. Susan.
You've answered this to some degree, but let's get a little more specific.
Okay.
Winning the Democratic primary is one thing.
Yeah.
But what will your strategy be to get me and a lot of other Democrats 270 electoral votes?
Yeah, right. That's a loaded question. Because, of course, the electoral vote system is something that needs to be discussed and addressed. But I will say that the way that I am approaching our campaign now, and intend to approach it in the general, is about what we need to do to organize people on the ground, to build coalition. Again, with the message and with the spirit of understanding we all have more in common than what separates us, and that we're all going to either rise or fall together in terms of the outcome of this election. It is going to be about what we need to do to register people to vote, to get them to the polls. All of that is really going to matter. You know, I think of winning elections as having three components. There is the piece which we have discussed about the ideas. That was the last question. There's the piece about messaging. Well, actually, that was the ideas was 2 questions ago. The ideas about messaging, I think, is part of the last question, which is how do you get your message out, right? Which is how do you message the ideas? But the third piece is the tactical, the structural aspect of winning a campaign. And that's going to be about how do we get people to vote. I do believe that in so many ways, 2020 is not going to be 2016. And 2018 tells me that. 2018 tells us that. When we elected 100 women to the United States Congress, so many who had never run for office before. I mean, I think about people like a mom who lost her son tragically to gun violence, who had never run before, and ran in the state of Georgia on the importance of smart gun safety law, and won the seat formerly held by Newt Gingrich. Her name is Lucy McBath. When I look at the kind of what we've seen happening around the country, you know, people are awake or woke. And I really do believe that we have to be smart in terms of harnessing the energy that is out there. But I believe we're going to get this done.
Good.
Yeah.
Quick follow-up on that. With the Electoral College, you said reform. Would abolishing the Electoral College be on the agenda for you or not?
I think it should be on the table.
Simple as
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Let's go to Ken Berlin.
Yeah. Because listen, at some fundamental point, it gets back to the point about one person, one vote. And I think it should be on the table for discussion.
Kenneth Berlin.
Hi, Senator. Nice to speak with you.
Nice to speak with you.
What have you done in your career to show your foreign policy expertise?
Great.
And how would you rebuild our tragically lost relationships with our allies?
Yeah, and I agree with you, tragically.
Yeah.
So I will tell you, I currently serve on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I am therefore for the last 2.5 years a recipient of classified information from our intelligence community on a daily basis practically. And I am acutely aware of the threats to our nation and the hotspots around the globe. and what we should be concerned about. And I will tell you, without any intent in causing alarm, we live in a dangerous world. And we have to be smart about how we go about securing our nation's safety. And one of the best ways to do that, to the point of your question, is to work with our allies. I would immediately re-enter the relationships and the integrity of the relationships with NATO. Re-enter the Paris Agreement. Reconnect with our allies in the EU. What we have seen is a current president who has turned America's back on these relationships. And part of the problem is that I don't think he has any full appreciation for the fact that, as with any relationship in our lives, you have to invest in a relationship. It's not just about transactional, this one thing we worked out. It's about a relationship that is based on trust. And part of a relationship based on trust is you also speak truth. And we know this president doesn't know how to speak truth very well. And so these are some of the ways that I intend to bring us back to a place where we are not only re-engaging those friendships and those alliances, but also strengthening our security, because they are connected. And ultimately, I would say that it is also about having, and this is just a fundamental sad point, it is about also having a president of the United States who understands that she must read the briefing books, unlike the current president, and must engage with our diplomats and our ambassadors, current and former, and our smart people in the State Department, and our generals, and do that in a way that is about making smart decisions instead of these decisions that are being made out of ego. Because let's just look at the empirical evidence again of what we have been experiencing, not just witnessing, guys, but experiencing, because it's our nation, it's our nation. This is a nation that belongs to the people, not the current occupant of the White House. What we have seen is, to feed his ego, he does this photo op with the North Korean dictator, elevating this person's standing, not once, but twice. What is that about? Embracing the so-called strongmen and rejecting the long-term friends. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it can be done, and I intend to do it.
I bet you can.
Our last question is from Ann Ackerman. You got about 2 minutes.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
My question is, what would you advise my college students to examine about the electoral process?
Oh, that's great. Well, a lot of it we've discussed. Examine the influence of money in campaigns. Really see that for what it is. You know, it's a sad reality of campaigns that a large part of the campaign structure is based on how are you going to raise the money. It's gross. Honestly, I mean, look, you know, I put it also in the context of the practical, don't hate the player, hate the game, right? Until we change the game, this is what you have to do. But I much prefer to spend all of that time talking to you, Ann, and talking to your students. There is the part of the process that is about really, and I would ask your students to really study and amplify the significance of the gutting of the Voting Rights Act in 2013. With that decision in Shelby v. Holder coming out of the United States Supreme Court. Right after that decision that gutted the teeth out of the Voting Rights Act, at least almost 24 states immediately passed laws that were designed to intimidate and suppress the vote, in particular of African Americans, Native Americans, and students. There was one case out of North Carolina where the Court of Appeal, when reviewing that case, said that that legislature, and I'm going to quote, with surgical precision, wrote a law to intimidate, suppress, or prevent African Americans from voting. And so when we go back to an issue like talking about the Electoral College or money in politics, and it is about also talking about, is it one person, one vote? Who is influencing an election and who votes? So I'd ask them to study that. And then I'd ask them to study also a connected issue, which is foreign interference in the election. We are clear about this. 2016, the Russians interfered in the election of our President of the United States. The United States President. And if you listen to Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, and read the reports from our intelligence community about what happened, let's be clear, it is very likely, in fact, almost without any doubt, likely to happen again in 2020. And we have to be prepared because they are going to play us. They are going to play us. They are going to try and fan the flames of hate and division. They're going to try and have us going at each other as Americans. And it's going to be an influence campaign that is based on misinformation. And I'd ask your students to study that as well and to think about how we're going to inoculate. How are the American people going to know when they're getting played, when they're being fed misinformation in a way that it does not influence our so important elections? And that's at a state level, at a local level, and at the federal level. So I would ask them to study that because, you know, frankly, I think that we could do a much better job, and we're going to need your students in their role of leadership to get it done.
Well, hopefully we promote civic engagement.
Yes,
Right.
yes,
Thank you, Ann.
and then there's that. Exactly.
Thank you, Ann. And that's time for a conversation with
Okay.
candidate Senator Harris. We
Thank you,
appreciate your
Adam.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you for those watching. Thank you to our town hall audience.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.